We're going to mix the lesson with the singing tonight. I'll talk a little bit, and then we'll all sing a little bit, and then I'll talk a little bit, and we'll all sing a little bit, and if we get finished in time, we'll go home. Our text for this evening is only one verse. Now, I went to college and learned how to preach, and I learned that what you do is you take the text and you study it, and you study it in the original language and all those kind of things, and then you work your sermon out of that, and you have one point and all that. We're going to look at this one verse, and we're not going to exegete it. We're going to obey it. In Colossians 3:16, "Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly, and teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts." So we're going to look at songs and we're going to sing. But I'm going to back up a little bit and get 6 feet away from a couple of people on the front up here. Because even though I can talk through this mask, I can't see through the fog. There. It's Christmas time. So we're going to look at 3 of my favorite Christmas carols. All of them are my favorite Christmas carols. But these are my 3 favorite Christmas carols for tonight. In Oberndorf, Austria, there was a young man named Joseph Mohr who was assistant pastor. It was a real triumph for him to have an opportunity to get the education and then be brought into the church and leading the church in that way. He had an embarrassing beginning because he grew up as a little boy, and most everybody around knowing that his father was nowhere in the picture. He didn't know where his father was or anything about that, and it was kind of embarrassing to his mother. But he became very devoted to the Lord and studied hard and became a pastor. He had gone out one night to visit a family where a new baby had been born. And he probably had a nice time of congratulating them and all that. As he walked back home in that cold place, there was fresh snow all over the ground, and it was cold, and it was clear. And if you've seen one of those kind of places, one of those kind of nights where you look at your town or your village, and it's all snow-covered, and it's cold and crisp, it's very peaceful. And if it's still enough that on the chimneys there's a column of smoke going straight up, that adds to it too. He was looking at all that beauty, and he stopped and he remembered the stories of his birth and how he had such a hard time as a little boy. And he thought about that little boy who had just been born. And all those thoughts came to him, and he was looking at that beautiful scenery. He wrote the words, "Silent night, holy night." He wrote the poem. Now, some of the stories say that he had written it a couple of years earlier. Now he was just remembering it, but some of them say he wrote it that night. Well, he went on back home that night, and the next day was Christmas. The next day was Christmas Eve. And he thought, this is a nice little poem. If I could get some music for it, we could sing it in the Christmas Eve service tonight. He had a good friend. They had learned a lot of things together. They were both quite musically inclined, and his friend's name was Franz Gerber. He called Franz and said, "Franz, come over and see me. I've got a project for you. I've got to have some music for a poem so we can sing this song tonight for the Christmas Eve service." Well, you know, good friends will come along and help you out no matter what it's like. And so he came and they went into the church and began to get ready. And his friend was an organist and a guitarist. The organ wouldn't play. Now, some stories say that was caused by mice getting in and eating the bellows. I don't know, but it wouldn't work anyhow. So what are we going to do? I have my guitar. Okay, we'll sing with the guitar. So he had the words. In a few minutes, Franz had the music, and they used it that evening for the Christmas Eve service. It was a good song. It was such a simple song that everybody could catch on to both the words and the music quickly, and they just enjoyed singing it. And then some people who were there talked to other people, and word got around. And after a while, there was a traveling singing group that went around to different places, and they used this song. There was people who would hear from them, and eventually it got so popular in Northern Europe that it was played in various gatherings. One night, the King of Prussia happened to be in the congregation when they sang Old Silent Night. And he was so impressed that he issued a decree. If you're king, you don't have to get the Congress to do things. He issued a decree that at all the Christmas services in all the kingdom, they would sing Silent Night. And so that it made it even more popular. It became so well known and such a wonderful song that in 1914, during the First World War, there was a time when the Allied forces and the Allied Axis, anyhow, the good guys and the bad guys, were close together, enough so that they could actually shout insults at each other across the line. But on one cold Christmas Eve night, somebody began to sing Silent Night. And they were singing it in English. But down the trenches a little ways, there were some Frenchmen, and they started singing it in French. It had by this time been translated into 300 different languages around the world. And on the other side, they began to sing it in German. And then they sang some more songs. And they had a little Christmas Eve truce there that night. Silent Night has become probably the most well-known of all the Christmas songs. I have a homework assignment for this song. This song came together because two friends, realizing that something had to be done in a hurry, sat down and helped each other until it got done. Can you think of a time when you had a problem and you knew a friend who would help you work on it and got it done? A close friend, a good buddy, will always stand beside you. I was thinking about that today and thought of an old friend I had from way back in college days and tried to telephone him and it didn't work. He was always a great prankster. And when I dialed his number, after a while I got a voice that says, "Thank you for calling the Grunge. If you want to talk to Matt, dial 27. If you want to talk to Francis, punch 26. If you want to talk to Dean, punch 25. And he didn't go through all of them. He went through a lot of them. And then he said in the end, and for despair or malaise, just press on. He wasn't saying punch, he said press. So he was such a joke. I never did get him. I'm going to have to try some other way to get a hold of him. But I think he just got tired of hearing all those kind of things and hopes that somebody who does those kind of things will give him a call. Think about a friend. Maybe call a friend if you can reach them. Send a note. Talk to them. Appreciate a friend. Phillips Brooks was pastor of Holy Trinity Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. He was a big man. Some folks say that I'm tall. He was about 6'8". And he never married, didn't have any children, but he loved the children. All around the church, the children would always come to him. He had some toys in his office, so the children could come in and visit him, and he'd have things for them to play with, and he'd play along with them, I'm sure. In 1865, what was going on? The Great Civil War was going on. The country was torn apart. There was a lot of sadness, a lot of difficulty. But he had a wonderful opportunity. He had a church who wanted to do something for him, and they gave him a year's sabbatical. He went overseas, traveled in various places, and it happened to be that he was in Palestine on Christmas Eve. So he rented a horse in Jerusalem and rode from Jerusalem to Bethlehem on horseback. And it's not very far, but it is downhill and uphill again. And he said as he was riding along and the guides were telling him what was going on, they got to the place where they thought these are the fields that the shepherds probably were in on that night. And he said it was so moving. He went on into Bethlehem, and there was a church there that was having an evening service. It started at 10 o'clock and ended at 3 a.m. Now, we think a Christmas Eve program that lasts for an hour at midnight or something, but this was a long one. He said, and I'll quote him here, he wrote it in his journal, "I was standing in the old church in Bethlehem, close to the spot where Jesus was born, when the whole church was ringing hour after hour with the splendid hymns of praise, telling each other of the Savior's birth. When he returned home, he told friends that the Christmas Eve experience would be forever singing in my soul." 2 years later, he got the great idea that he needed to have a special song for the children that he loved so much. And so he, remembering that experience in Bethlehem that night, wrote that song, "O Little Town of Bethlehem." But he, like the other pastor, needed some musical help, so he called on the organist to write some words for it. He gave him the words. Not the music. He gave him the words, and Pastor Redner, who was the organist, set about to write some music. He sat down to the piano and he played something that didn't seem to fit just right, and he tried and tried, and eventually it became the Christmas Eve day, and this was supposed to be prepared for that night, and he still didn't have the words. He had the words, he didn't have the music. Well, it wasn't Christmas Eve, it was the day before that. He went to bed very discouraged, didn't know if he was going to be able to satisfy his pastor or not. And he said that while he was in bed, trying to sleep, not sleeping very well, he heard music. And he realized that he was hearing it in his mind. He got up immediately and started writing it down, and he wrote the music to "O Little Town of Bethlehem." He said that music was a gift from heaven. So that was in 1865. We're going to sing it tonight, and it'll remind us that the last verse that we'll sing, "O Holy Child of Bethlehem," becomes a prayer. Many of our hymns are that way. We sing glorious things about the greatness of the Lord or some great praise part, and then when it comes to the last part of it, we sing in prayer to the one we're singing about. The decade of the 1860s was very difficult for the whole country. It was the one that included the Great Civil War. It was especially a difficult time for Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the poet. In 1861, his wife, carrying a lantern with some oil in it, spilled some on her dress and caught fire, and she died in that fire. About the same time, shortly after that, his son Charles decided that he needed to join the army. And they were Yankees, but I'll forgive him for that. And he insisted that he wanted to go and fight in the Union Army. He wanted to fight against slavery. His father, in his grief over his dear wife, just really didn't want him to go. He tried to discourage him from that. But Charles had a strong feeling that that's what he needed to do. So he did it without his father knowing. He went away and enlisted in the army, and he was fighting in the Civil War on the side of the Union when he was wounded, rather seriously wounded, enough so that it ended his soldiering days. He was home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, recuperating in a hospital, and on Christmas Eve, his father, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, was sitting beside his bed, and he was thinking about his son and the terrible war and all the things that were going on. And then he began to hear church bells ringing. And being a poet, that music spoke to his heart, and he wrote the words of the hymn that we're going to sing now. "I heard the bells on Christmas Day." Now, you have the music in your folder, but on the back of your folder you have all of the words. Most of our hymnals do not include verse 4. This one, I had to adapt it a little bit to be politically correct, but it shows that the context in which he was writing this. It was on Christmas Eve, he was hearing the bells and all that, or on Christmas Day. He was hearing the bells, But at the same time, he was thinking about this terrible war that was going on. Verse 4 says, "Then from each crude and smoking mouth the cannon thundered in the south, and with the sound the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men." So we're going to sing all the verses, including that one. And as we do, picture a man sitting in the hospital room by his son, severely wounded, and thinking about all the sadness that was going on. That war that Longfellow was grieving and thinking about that night, before it was over, took some 650,000 lives of Americans. Anybody heard an update? How many people have died from COVID yet? We're over 1 million, aren't we, worldwide? I meant to check, but it's more than 650,000. And we're having a hard time too. We have a glimmer of hope now with the possibility of a vaccine. My daughter is a nurse preventionist in her hospital in Vermont, and she was telling me that they expect a shipment of vaccine next week, and how many hundreds of shots they have to give in 2 or 3 days, and then get ready for another batch of people, and then after a while come back and give the 3-week. They've got a lot of work to do. She's going to be working steadily over Christmas time. And it's been a time this year that has been terribly discouraging for many people, where illness and death has entered into their lives. But it's been a time that's just taken the spirit out of a lot of us for most of the times and most of the days. And all the masks and everything don't help very much, do they? If you're discouraged, or when you're discouraged, or if maybe there's something else that is affecting you even deeper than the COVID pandemic around the world, remember that last verse. God is not dead, nor does he sleep. And there will be peace on earth, goodwill to men.